major college football news yesterday. Michigan coach Jim Harbaugh negotiating a 4-game suspension with the NCAA for recruiting violations that date back to the COVID recruiting dead period imposed in March of 2020. Now, 4 games is a third of the season, but you ask yourself, how much will they miss Harbaugh? And the answer is, well, probably not that much. Their first 4 games are all in Ann Arbor. And you look at our analytics there, they give the Wolverines a 91% chance to start at 4-0. So let's say that it might not hurt them, but yet it feels like a very big story. So let's get to the bottom of it. Paul Finebaum is up with us early this morning, and so is Pete Thamel, who was at Big Ten Media Days in Indianapolis. Pete, what can you tell us about how we arrived, where we arrived on Harbaugh?
Sure, Greeny. The phrase in NCAA parlance is negotiated resolution. And essentially, there was an NCAA investigation into illicit COVID-19 visits. Michigan had faced 4 level 2 violations. There was some type of failure to cooperate on Harbaugh's part. And because of that, one of those violations was elevated, or a new one was added to a level 1. And that's when he became in the suspension crosshairs. So they've gone back and forth for months. In January, we reported that he refused to tell investigators that he lied to them. So this negotiated resolution basically comes down to Jim Harbaugh admitting recruiting violations, although a source told me yesterday he still did not put in the document that he did lie. So it's a little bit of semantical gymnastics here, and Jim Harbaugh will miss likely the first 4 games. I think an important nuance to where we are, Green, is that he can coach practice. So he won't be on the sideline for those 4 solitary days, but he will still be able to shape his team all September.
Okay, so that is a very important point, actually. It's not like he's going to be just gone for essentially the first month of the season. He just won't be there on Saturdays. Paul, the number of times I've asked you questions about Jim Harbaugh, I can't even count them anymore. What do you think of this one?
Let's start with the NCAA. It's beyond a clown show, Greeny. It is a clown show, and the fact that they would sanction him for this is really beyond the pale. I mean, essentially, he's accused of buying somebody a hamburger and then not telling the truth about it. I mean, Greeny, don't eject me out of my seat here, but I'm starting to respect Jim Harbaugh for standing firm and refusing to go down the NCAA's path. This could have been over with a long time ago, but Harbaugh would not admit he lied. And because the NCAA is so backwards and so antediluvian, they ended up with this agreement. In the end, the NCAA has no jurisdiction over anyone or anybody, and they can't push things too far because the schools will take them to court, and the NCAA maybe will lose. But in the end, I think Jim Harbaugh looks really good here, and this might be my final broadcast ever on this earth because I'm leaving.
I was about to say, what have you done with Paul Finebaum? That's not the room I usually see you in, and that's most certainly not the tone you usually take. Is this a playoff team again this year, Paul? He's got back-to-back years in the playoff, back-to-back years beating Ohio State. Is he going back there again this year?
I say no. I mean, they're capable of it, and they have everything you need to get there. But I think Lady Luck is going to go against them this time. I think the team to beat in the Big Ten is Ohio State, and I think ultimately that's where Michigan moves from inside the cut line to outside.
Fair enough. Okay, Paul, stay with me here. We'll have more with you as we go. And Pete, obviously covering Big Ten Media Days there. There's a lot of interesting stuff to get to. We'll come back to you in Indianapolis. This obviously is an enormous story. Pete, what can you tell the folks about what happened here?
Well, Greeny, I think the best way to look at what Jim Harbaugh is facing in this expected 4-game suspension is a negotiated resolution is essentially a plea bargain. Jim Harbaugh did not cooperate with NCAA investigators amid an investigation into more minor recruiting violations. And because he did not cooperate, that escalated the level of his exposure here. So a source told me yesterday he did not admit to lying to NCAA investigators, but he did in this negotiated resolution admit to breaking NCAA rules. So it's a little bit of semantical gymnastics, but the bottom line is Jim Harbaugh will not be on the sideline for 4 games. He's expected to return September 30th at Nebraska. But again, he will be able to coach the team during that time. So the identity of Michigan, Greeny, will stay Michigan.
Yeah, to be clear, and you mentioned this a little earlier this morning, he's allowed to be there for practice and everything else. He just can't be on the sidelines for the games on Saturdays. Paul Finebaum, I see you're chuckling over there.
Well, I mean, I just can't figure this out, Greeny. The NCAA has turned Jim Harbaugh into a sympathetic figure, which is like saying that Hannibal Lecter is a warm and fuzzy guy. I mean, it doesn't compute, and but only the NCAA can do this. Now, I know people at home go, "Why do you guys always beat up on the NCAA?" Because it's an inept, inefficient organization, and Jim Harbaugh could have gotten out of this easier, but to his credit, and I mean that, to his credit, he said, I'm not dealing with these characters. I'm not going to admit that I did something that I don't think I did." Essentially, he bought a player a hamburger. That's really a big deal now, Greeny, in the world where players are walking around with seven-figure deals. But the NCAA has to instill the integrity of the student athlete.
Yeah, the whole thing doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, although Pete, I think, did a good job of explaining it. Meanwhile, Pete, how should we expect this suspension potentially to impact Harbaugh going forward?
Well, Greeny, if there's one thing about NCAA investigations that have been consistent is that they're slow. So when this arose in January and Harbaugh initially met with the NCAA and refused to admit he lied, my initial reaction was that he would just punt on this and grind it through the NCAA's notoriously slow process and push it past this season to next season. So that's a long way to say Harbaugh taking this punishment now, as he's expected to sit these first four games, is a sign a little bit that he's not definitely going to try to run for Michigan at the end of this year. Now, remember, he interviewed with the Vikings 2 years ago. That was on signing day. Last year, he went deep with the Broncos in their process. There's been some tension with administration at Michigan. So the fact that he's taking this now in a weird way is a little bit of a sign of his commitment, that he isn't just running to the door.
Interesting. Well, what do you think of that, Paul?
Well, I'm glad to see that because I'm tired of spending January chasing Jim Harbaugh around with Pete. He's an unbelievably interesting figure, Greeny, in spite of all the shots. But let's not lose sight of the fact that he is trying to get to the playoffs for the third straight year, and that was after having done nothing during his previous eight years. So Jim Harbaugh is rolling along very well, and that's why which is why I don't understand his looking around. But when there's tension at home, people tend to look elsewhere.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.